Hey, hockey card fans! Welcome back to the channel. I was down in Oshawa, or Whitby, the other day for a Durham College commencement celebration, or ceremony, whatever you call it. Graduation, anyway. Because my oldest son graduated from Durham. And while I was in that city, I said, let's see what I can find. So I went to a place called Maximum Cards and Collectables at 306 Dundas Street West, Whitby, Ontario. And mostly what you find is the modern day stuff, as well as Funko Pops when it comes to cards. But I did ask for some old O-Pee-Chee cards, and they had a small but interesting collection of them, more than what I thought I'd find there. Definitely. So I spent $35 and only got 10 cards, but you'll see why in a minute. So the first ones I picked up were from the 1975 O-Pee-Chee set. So this is a 74-75 stat year. This is Philadelphia Flyers' second cup win. And we'll start off with right winger for the Boston Bruins, Bobby Schmatz. This card is actually in fairly good shape. I paid $2 for it. These cards had a dark brown back. This is probably the first year that I really started collecting cards on my own. When I was 4 years old, I got cards, and my older brother did too at the time. So this is probably the first year that I started collecting cards seriously. Bobby Schmatz was never drafted, but he did play for the Chicago Blackhawks in 68-69. Played like 76 games of them, and then 11 games in the 68 playoffs. Went to the Vancouver Canucks, part of the expansion draft, and spent 3.5 seasons with Vancouver. Had like 38 goals in 73, and then in 74 played 49 games and he had 26 goals, 19 assists for 45 points. Boston came calling, so he went to the Bruins and stayed with the Bruins from 74 all the way to 1980, where he played 20 games in 1980 for the Bruins. So he's part of the Don Cherry era. Don Cherry loved this guy. 1980, he went from Boston to the Edmonton Oilers, played 29 games with them, then went to the Colorado Rockies for 20 games. So Cherry was coaching in Colorado at the time, so he really loved him. Glenn Sather probably knew about him. And then in 80-81, he spent one more year in Vancouver. He actually did pretty respectable. 73 games, 27 goals, 34 assists for 61 points, and 137 penalty minutes. In one playoff series in 1976-77, so the 77 playoffs, he actually scored 11 goals in 14 games. 11 goals, 1 assist for 12 points. So Cherry used him a lot. So he's had an interesting trade history. He was claimed in the interleague draft by St. Louis Blues from Chicago Blackhawks in 69 on June 11th. And then on June 27th, 1969, he was traded from St. Louis with Norm Bedouin to Montreal Canadiens for Ernie Wakely. Okay, Ernie Wakely's a goalie. Bedouin was one of his cards when he played with the WHA. He was traded from Montreal to Salt Lake Golden Eagles for cash. So he went to the Central Hockey League for cash. Traded from Salt Lake Golden Eagles to Seattle Totems for Guy Fielder. Then traded from Seattle Totems to Vancouver Canucks for Jim Wist and Ed Hodem. Minor league deals they got listed here. Then he was traded from Vancouver Canucks to Boston Bruins for the rights to Mike Walton, Fred O'Donnell, and Chris Oldefson. So Boston gave up a lot for this guy. Of course, remember, he was a 30-goal scorer with Vancouver. And in 49 games, he had 26 goals, 45 points in 74 with Vancouver before getting traded. So it's kind of like a trade deadline deal. Then he was traded from Boston Bruins to Edmonton Oilers for future considerations in 79. 80 traded from Edmonton Oilers to Colorado Rockies for Don Ashby. Edmonton got hosed on that one. And then signed by the Vancouver Canucks. So he's a highly demanded player. And he could actually score. He had 8 20-plus goal seasons. And 2... Make that 9, sorry. 9 20-plus goal seasons. Straight of that. And he also had 2 30-goal seasons. Added another 28 goals in 84 playoff games. So never won a cup or anything. Just the trade history is pretty interesting on that card. All right, moving along, we have Montreal Canadiens right winger Jim Roberts. I actually like this card. That's it. Like the Bobby Schmotz card is an action card, but it's obviously been airbrushed and filled out. So they took a photo and airbrushed it, made it look cartoonish almost. But Jim Roberts is an actual card, probably during intermission where they're just skating around, or he's coming back from the bench. Jim Roberts played much of his early career in the minors with the Eastern Pro Hockey League, the American Hockey League, and the Central Pacific Hockey League, or Central Pro Hockey League. I'm not sure what the CPHL is. Played with the Montreal Canadiens from 64 to 67. Won 2 Stanley Cups with them. He was actually a defenseman early in his career, so he's a hybrid. He's a defenseman right winger. So he wins 2 Stanley Cups with Montreal. Doesn't get a lot of playing time but then goes to the St. Louis Blues in 68. And from 68 to 72, he's with them. Goes to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals. Does better statistically. Gets traded in 72 to Montreal, so Montreal reacquired him. And then he plays 5.5 seasons with Montreal, winning 3 Stanley Cups before finally going back to St. Louis for one more year in 78. He also coached the Buffalo Sabres in 82, was 21-60-8. Didn't make the playoffs, or he got replaced, I don't know. This is during the Scotty Bowman era of GMing Buffalo, and Scotty Bowman, the only coach that could coach for Scotty Bowman was Scotty Bowman himself. So he then went on and coached the Hartford Whalers for a year and was 26-41-13, lost in the first round of the playoffs, and wasn't invited back. So there's that. So Montreal really liked this guy. Scotty Bowman loved him. So he's claimed an expansion draft by St. Louis Blues from Montreal. Then he was traded from St. Louis to Montreal for Phil Roberto. Phil Roberto has probably the best card I've ever seen in hockey, where he's punching out Billy Smith. So Jim Roberts won 5 Stanley Cups in his career. Not bad for a guy. Played 1,000 games, only scored 126 goals, 320 points. 153 playoff games with 20 goals, 36 points. So not bad stats for that guy. Next we're going with Philadelphia Flyers right winger Don Selesky. You can tell that one's also been touched up in the face. These cards are in really good shape. So I paid only $2 for Jim Roberts and for Don Selesky, so I'm at $6 right now. As far as the hockey cards go, Don Selesky was, Big Bird as they call him, was part of the 2 Stanley Cups with the Flyers. He was drafted by the Philadelphia Flyers in the 6th round, 64th overall in the 1969 draft. So obviously, which is good, so he's part of the Flyers. Part of their draft, which is good. They drafted pretty good in the early parts. Not a bad goal scorer, 3 20-goal seasons with the Flyers. Tough guy. He had a lot of penalty minutes in the first part of his career. He did go to the Colorado Rockies and played just over a season with them, from 78 to 80. He would have been a Don Cherry type of guy. He was traded from Philadelphia Flyers to Colorado Rockies for future considerations on March 4th, 1979. So he missed the playoff run of the Flyers in 1979. Injuries, I think, did him in. So we have our first goalie here, Atlanta Flames goaltender Dan Bouchard. This one's been touched a little, but pretty much looks like yeah, he's been highlighted. I love that Atlanta Flames jersey. I really do. It's one of my favorite jerseys. Dan Bouchard was actually drafted by the Boston Bruins in the 2nd round, 27th overall in the 1970 draft. Boston had a lot of good goalies that they drafted. They drafted Ken Dryden. They drafted Dan Bouchard. They had Bernie Parent in their system. It's like they let all these good goalies. Like Bouchard was a good goalie, just played for not so good teams. He stayed with the Atlanta Flames even when they went to Calgary. And then in Calgary, Pat Riggins kind of supplanted him. He didn't have a good start, so they traded him off to the Quebec Nordiques. Stayed there from 81 to 85, and then went to the Winnipeg Jets for one final season. This season in question, he was 20 wins, 15 losses, 5 ties with a 2.78 average and 3 shutouts. So not shabby for 40 games. Him and Phil Meyer shared the net in Atlanta. So he's claimed in the expansion draft by Atlanta Flames from Boston Bruins. And then on January 29, 1981, he was traded from the Calgary Flames to Quebec Nordiques for Jamie Hislop. I'd say Quebec won that deal. Jamie Hislop, well, it's okay, not great. Bouchard's best season, he had 5 shutouts with a 2.78 average back in 73-74 with Atlanta. So remember, this is Atlanta's second year of existence, and this goalie's already got 5 shutouts. Atlanta had a decent team in the 70s, just couldn't get over that hump. And then finally in 85, he was traded from Quebec to Winnipeg for a round 7 pick in 1986, which turned out to be Mark Vermette. So not a bad career. 656 games, 27 shutouts, a 3.27 goals against average, because he played for the Quebec Nordiques and the Winnipeg Jets in the 80s. 286 wins, 232 losses, 113 ties. Not bad, not great. He was a decent goalie. Not always playing on the best team, or best defensive team of that. Atlanta wasn't known for their defensive capabilities, and neither was Quebec. Now we have one more goalie here. We have Pittsburgh Penguins goalie Michel Plessis. This is an airbrush card because he was with the Kansas City Scouts and they got traded to the... This guy was actually a round 1, first overall, picked by the Montreal Canadiens in the 1968 amateur draft. He might have been the Montreal Canadiens, one of their priority picks that year. They only used it twice, and I think he was one of them. He played 1 game for St. Louis in 70-71, probably as a loan. Won a Calder Trophy in the AHL, the American Hockey League, with the Voyagers in 72. Played with Montreal from 73 to 74. Didn't have much success, was 18, 6, and 5, which isn't bad, but not great for Montreal. He had a 4.08 goals against average 1 year and 2.58 the other. So this is when Ken Dryden disappeared. So he did win a Stanley Cup in Montreal in the 1973 playoffs. So Michel Plessis did get his name on a cup. He was there in 1973. Montreal won the cup, so he would have got his name on the cup, and I looked it up and he did. Plessis is also the first professional goalie in the history of hockey to score a goal. On February 21st, 1971, the Oklahoma City Blazers were trailing the Blues 2-1 and decided to pull their goalie. This is for the Kansas City Blues. Plessis scored on the open net and became the first professional goalie in the history of the NHL, in the history of the game to score a goal. So that's interesting. He scored first goalie to score in a professional hockey league. That's interesting to know. So in 74, he was claimed in the expansion draft by Kansas City. Traded from Kansas City Scouts to Pittsburgh Penguins for Dennis Huron and Jean-Guy Legacy. I would have to say KC should have won that deal. Dennis Huron was a better goalie than Michael Plessis. And then in 1982, he was traded from Quebec Nordiques with future considerations to the Hartford Whalers for John Garrett. So Plessis played for St. Louis 1 game, Montreal two seasons, played only 32 games. Played only 32 games. Won a Stanley Cup in 73 though, got his name on there. Went to Kansas City, played 24 games before getting traded to Pittsburgh, and played another 20 games. Then he played 55 games in 76 with Pittsburgh. Went to the Colorado Rockies and played 54 games in 76-77, and played 2 more seasons for 65 games. 1980 he only played 6 games, and then 1980-81 he played 33 games with Quebec Nordiques, and then played 8 games in 81-82. I have his last card with the Nordiques. I have some of his cards when he was with the Rockies too. He only had 2 NHL shutouts in his entire career, and both were with the Penguins. So not a great goalie, but he played with a lot of bad teams. When you play with an expansion team and then Colorado Rockies of the 70s, 80s, and the Quebec Nordiques, not good. So the last card I have for this group is a checklist. It's not in bad shape. It's got some marks on it though. You can't have everything in the world, and I paid $5 for it. So I paid $15 for 6 cards. Not bad considering. Checklists are always more expensive. So it's $2 per card and $5 for these ones. Now we're going to go to the 1971 O-Pee-Chee set. So the 70-71 stat year. This is called the photograph series or portrait series. And I have Toronto Maple Leaf center Jim Harrison. Paid $3 for this card. It's in fairly good shape. As far as Leafs go, Jim Harrison is not a household name. Previously, he'd played with the Boston Bruins from 69 to 70. But then he was traded from Boston to Toronto in 1970. So he didn't win a cup with Boston. He played 2.5 years with Toronto before jumping to the WHA. I think I have his WHA card. I do. Played for the Alberta Oilers, which became the Edmonton Oilers, and then the Cleveland Crusaders. Then came back and played with Chicago Blackhawks. I have his card for that too. Then went back to Edmonton in 79-80 for 3 games. When they went to the NHL. Not exactly a household name. 325 NHL games, only 67 goals. But he had 117 goals in 232 WHA games, so he's a better player in the W. Yeah, he's traded from Toronto Maple Leafs to Boston Bruins for Wayne Carleton. Well, Wayne Carleton won a Stanley Cup, that's for sure. Jim Harrison left out of the cold. Poor guy. So now going back a little further, we have from the 1970 O-Pee-Chee set, so the 69-70 year. This is the movie star set. And we have Toronto Maple Leafs center Mike Shaky Walton. They call it the movie star set because of these little light dots in the background. Mike Walton won a Stanley Cup with Toronto in 1967, which was their last cup. Then he also won a Stanley Cup with the Boston Bruins in 1972. So he played 5.5 seasons with Toronto, 3 with Boston, then went to the WHA, played for the Minnesota Fighting Saints. I have his WHA card. Then he went and played with the Vancouver Canucks for 3 seasons. Then St. Louis Blues, back to Boston, and then finally Chicago by the end of his career. This guy was really highly in demand. 50 goal scorer in the WHA, but that doesn't say much. Other than that, he had 30 goals with Toronto, 22, 21 goals with Toronto, 28, 25 with Boston, 29 with Vancouver. But he did get traded a lot. So in 1971, he was traded from Toronto Maple Leafs with Bruce Gamble, a round 1 pick in the draft, to the Philadelphia Flyers for Bernie Parent and round 2 pick in the draft. Bernie Parent, ironically, would leave Toronto and go back to Philly. Traded from Philadelphia Flyers to Boston Bruins for Rick McLeish. Rick McLeish was a big part of the Flyers' wins. Wrights traded from Boston Bruins with Fred O'Donnell and Chris Oleson to Vancouver Canucks for Bobby Schmatz. Hard to say who won that trade. No one won a Stanley Cup, but Bobby Schmatz was probably a better player, but Fred O'Donnell and Chris Oleson? Then he was traded from Vancouver to St. Louis for round 4 pick in the draft. Then he gets released and signed. So Walton's later career wasn't anything special, but he had a pretty good WHA career. Didn't win an Avco though. Now we're really going to go back in time to my father's era. We have some Parkhurst, 1954 Parkhurst series. So this is the 53-54 Parkhurst. We have Toronto Maple Leafs center Bob Bailey. Can't really see his face there because I paid $7 for this card. So the older back you go, the more expensive it gets. This place in Whitby had a bunch of these cards. It has a little crease corner. This is actually a rookie card too. Bob Bailey played 86 games with the Leafs over 3 seasons. Actually won an American Hockey League, an AHL trophy with Cleveland Barons and Pittsburgh Hornets. Then he went to the Detroit Red Wings and Chicago Blackhawks. And then that was it. Then he spent the rest of his career in the minors. So not exactly a household name. Did get traded a lot. Traded from Toronto Maple Leafs with Bob Sabourin to Springfield Indians for cash. Springfield must have had a lot of cash. Traded from Springfield Indians to Detroit Red Wings for cash. So they got their cash back. Then he was claimed in an interleague draft by Chicago from Detroit. Then in 1957 he was traded from Chicago Blackhawks with Heck Lalonde, Jack McIntyre, and Nick Mikowski to Detroit Red Wings for Billy D, Bill Deneen, who I've heard of, Lauren Ferguson, and Earl Dutch Rival. A big trade of a lot of minor league guys. That's interesting getting in these old cards that my dad had. I have a couple from the year before. I'll have to show them one time. And then I have New York Rangers defenseman Leo Rice from the same series. Paid $7 for him. Again, a guy I don't know anything about. So he started his career in Chicago. Then went to the Detroit Red Wings, won 2 Stanley Cups with the Red Wings. So he played with Gordie Howe before going to the Rangers. Played 498 games in the NHL, only had 28 goals, 109 points. So he did have that going for him, 2 Stanley Cups. But there we have it, 10 cards. Spent $35 getting them, plus some taxes. So 38, let's say, altogether. Not a bad find. If I actually had more money to spare, I would have got more of these type, because there was a bunch of these, all for $7. And there were a lot of Phil Esposito and Bobby Orr cards there. So I was thinking, almost pulled the trigger on a few Bobby Orrs and Phil Espositos while I was there. But there wasn't much there. There was only one small box. Half of it was baseball, the other half was hockey. And this is what I found in a hurry, because the weather sucked and my wife was waiting in the car. Not a good combination. But anyway, you hockey card fans out there, let me know what you guys think of this little haul. If you're ever in the Whitby area, make sure to stop at Majestics. I'll leave a link in the description below. Just let me know what you guys think of these cards, and what's your favorite era of hockey cards. Leave comments in the comment section. Until next time, this has been Hockey Night in Belmont.